Iain Martin is Deakin's Vice-Chancellor, and he's on a mission to explore the evolving role of universities in society. In this episode, he shares his vision for education, research, and the power of curiosity to shape the future. From the lands of the Wadawurrung people, this is Stories of Wonder. Iain Martin, welcome to Stories of Wonder.
Thank you very much indeed. It's great to be with you.
How long have you been at Deakin now and in higher education more broadly?
So at Deakin, about 6.5 years. I started in May of 2019. But in higher education more broadly, I left university in 1987, had a couple of years working only clinically, and then it was back into a part-time university role. So whatever that is now, 35 years.
Wow, so in and around universities for that long. What were you doing before that?
Before that, I was a medical student at the University of Leeds in the UK and then a junior doctor in Leeds.
Wow, interesting. And you were a surgeon for a very long time as well.
I had a surgical certificate for about 20 years, yeah.
Wow. What was your university experience like and how did it shape you?
So, wind the clock back to 1982. At that stage, UK or Australia, less than 10% of school leavers went to university. And I was not from a family where going to university was the norm. My mum was a teacher. My dad was an engineer, but he'd done engineering through apprenticeship and then nighttime study rather than university. So it wasn't the norm. I arrived not knowing what on earth I was going to experience. Medicine's not a typical undergraduate experience because you go and you have a completely regimented existence for your entire 5 years. Everything is scheduled. There's very little choice. But it was extraordinary. And the one thing I reflect on is so much of what I have now in terms of how I look at things, think about things, was shaped by those 5 years and the 2 or 3 years afterwards when I came back into the university world. So, yeah, really interesting, but very, very different. Few things our students wouldn't like to think about. Every assessment was written. Every assessment was pretty brutal. And then when the results were out, there was no confidentiality. There was a list posted on the notice board which said, these people have passed with these marks and these people have failed. So,
my goodness.
So it was pretty open and pretty confronting at times.
Jeez, what were people's reactions when, they didn't do so well and everyone could see?
They were varied. There was the commonest reaction was probably the shoulders dropped and the slinking off into the background, hoping not to be seen.
Oh my goodness!
But there was tears and there was wails. It was brutal. I mean, it was extraordinary. And again, we have improved as a sector in so many ways, and that's certainly one way.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask. Did you ever have to experience a bit of a low score out in the public like that?
I am going to ashamedly or pleasingly say no. I got through everything okay.
Well, there we go. Yeah, but your resilience must have had to be quite high to be able to cope with that sort of pressure.
And look, medicine is a tough gig at the best of times, and it was tough then. So you were resilient when you were a student, and then being a junior doctor, even more resilient.
It's an interesting time for universities in the culture and society. Deakin's latest research, polling over 1,000 Australians, shows that public trust has declined in many of these institutions. 1 in 3 Australians say they don't trust unis. 2 in 5 think executives focus more on revenue than quality. Firstly, do you think that last one about revenue is actually true? But secondly, how do we fix this?
So, am I worried about ensuring that we have a strong financial base for Deakin to work on? Yes, I am, because without that, we can't do everything else we want. But for me, quality is the thing that you cannot give up on, because actually, if you give up on quality, then everything else falls away underneath you and the finances will suffer. So ultimately, it's about getting what you do as a university right, but within a sustainable financial context.
Mm. So the core reason for a university existing is not to,
No. So the core reason that we're here, there's two. One is to provide education for our students, number one. And number two is to carry out research and innovation that makes a difference beyond the walls of the university. And if we get those two pieces right and manage things carefully, you do well.
You've spoken recently about the idea of the social license that universities have. What do you mean when you say that?
So the concept of social license is really saying we exist at the pleasure of the Australian people. We are public organisations established by, with the exception of ANU, state acts of parliament. And effectively there is a contract that we will work to provide high quality education and high quality research and innovation for the benefit of Australia in its broadest sense. And in doing that, we are responsive to those public pressures, demands, and others. But the flip side of that is that public and our politicians we work with need to understand that there are some things about universities which will inevitably create some sense of discomfort, challenging and provoking the norm, challenging paradigms, saying actually the evidence is saying we've got a belief that actually we'd be better off as a nation doing something that way rather than that way. That's what we're here for. So it's not just a one way, we listen to the public, we listen to politicians and do what they say. It's about establishing that license to operate as high quality institutions.
So pushing the knowledge and the beliefs and, the assumptions of things.
It is really important. I can't remember who said it, but there is somebody who quoted in the past some statement that said something like our ignorance is infinite. And that is to say there is so much about the world around us, the environment we work in, we don't know. And it is our job to continue to explore and push and say, where does the truth as we best understand it lie in this? And that's our role. And that will rattle cages at times. And we have to be able to do that. That sits at the heart of academic freedom, that notion of academic discovery, which is a key part of being a university. But that cannot be the only piece because it has to reflect we're operating in Australia supported by the Australian people.
So a ceaseless curiosity.
Yeah. Ceaseless curiosity is a really good way of thinking about it because if I get asked what's the thing that a student should take away from an education and benefit from in the future, I think it is unbounded curiosity is a really important thing to do, is keep on asking questions, keep on asking the why, and keep on exploring, pushing yourself, going into different areas. And I think if we can impart some of that with our students, and I think we do our best to try and do that, we've done a good job.
So where are universities now in relation to this sort of aim, and where do you think that things need to change a bit?
So in answering that, can I wind the clock back a little bit? So as I said, when I started in university in 1982, Australia, the UK, less than 10% of people went to university. Now, in both countries, it's nudging 50%. We are providing access to a whole range of people. We've embraced the internet, which means that the knowledge we hold is no longer knowledge we hold, it's knowledge that we help interpret. We're doing research at a level and scale that we never would have imagined. We've really embraced internationalisation and been part of Australia's international outreach soft diplomacy efforts. But those successes have created a whole series of fault lines. And those fault lines are, well, you started with some of them, this notion that we're more interested in the money than the educational quality. This notion that we are seeing ourselves as corporate businesses rather than for Australia's good public organisations. Perceptional reality, I don't think it matters, but what I want to see is how we start to say, actually, how can we work with the public, work with community and political leaders to say, let's re-establish that license to operate between us and actually say, the fault lines have come from success, but let's reset the system so that we now have a system where it's understood what we do and why we do it, but there is that level of trust, responsibility, integrity, and accountability, those 4 key things in there, that our sector can demonstrate absolutely categorically as to why we are here.
So you said that universities have sort of lost sight of some of their shared purpose. You might have mentioned some of it there, but what do you think has caused that kind of a drift, and how do we find our way back?
I think some of it has been the consequence of effectively the massification of higher education. You can offer a very different offering if you're thinking about 10% of the population coming from the most academically able cohort of the country. It's a very different offering. And I think as we've gone more broad, that's led people to question. People will look back and say, well, when I went to university, wasn't it great? I had a great experience. I didn't have a part-time job. I was on campus 30 hours a week. That's not possible now for many of our students. Only 40% of Deakin's taught students come from that traditional 18-year-old school leaver category. People are coming back for either their first undergraduate degree or a later qualification. That changes the nature, which means we've got to work harder to engage and explain why we do and how we do it. Technology is changing things around us at a pace, and I think we need to be able to embrace, say, why are we doing and using the technology changes that we have. So those are the things that are sort of the positive drivers for change. But there's been some things happen over the last few years, 2 decades, that have changed things. One of those is rankings. So global rankings really didn't exist before about the year 2000.
Really?
Yes.
Boy.
So there was some ranking.
What were we advertising?
We were talking about what we did, but you have to remember you didn't really need to advertise, because if you had a capped number of students you could take and there were more people wanting to come than places available.
Yeah, you didn't have a problem.
You didn't have a problem.
Yeah.
And international education was a much smaller part of the mix then. So all of those things have changed.
Yeah.
But rankings have led to a sort of hierarchy. And what most rankings measure is research performance.
Yes.
Rather than what is it like to be an undergraduate at that university. And universities have had to respond to improve their rankings because they felt pressure to do so in order to maintain their student numbers and the viability and the standing of their institution.
Yeah.
But that has led to a whole series of drivers that aren't necessarily leading to a balance of focus on education versus focus on research and innovation. And I think that has perceptional reality changed the minds of the community. Because if you go out and talk to most stakeholders, and we did this in the survey we did, why are we there? Most Australians think we're there about education first and research second. Most universities tend to sort of think we're research first and education second in terms of parameters for what would drive them. And I think putting that right and putting education at the core of why we're here is part of my message in talking about this over the last few weeks and months, because that is why the Australian people believe they establish universities. The research is really beneficial, but the education is number one in their mind. Our data says that. I can certainly confirm from every conversation I have outside of the organisation that the majority of the public see it that way. But it doesn't therefore mean that you have to give up on the notion of research excellence. We've talked a lot at Deakin about this concept of balanced excellence, which is valuing both of those core missions equally, education and research, and driving to make sure that we grow capability and quality at both without one being at the expense of the other. And we've done it. And it's not just me doing the usual Vice-Chancellor, aren't we brilliant thing. The evidence that we have from improvements in research quality and where we stand in educational quality in Australia mean that if you do your usual sort of 4-plot graph with good on both in the top right-hand corner, we're right up there. So that for me is part of regaining trust and social license, is to say one doesn't have to trade off the other, and education really, really matters.
I guess beyond that, how do you've mentioned a couple of times whether it's perception or reality, it doesn't really matter because, to some the perception is, this or that. We still use rankings a lot in our marketing. Every university does, and it's a bit of a foggy sea, really. It almost all cancels each other out. What do you think that kind of change in our, core commitment to both of those things being as important as each other, how does that look on the other end? And how will we know that people have started to get the message that both education and research are core to our, fundamental values as a university?
I think ultimately it comes from proof points. And proof points for education is students come, they stay, they succeed, and when they leave, they say we had a good experience. And we've got concrete evidence for all of those proof points. Mm-hmm. In 2026, we will be a larger university in terms of student numbers than we've ever been. The demand to come and study at Deakin hasn't gone away. Mm-hmm. So we're there. And for most of the last 14 or 15 years, students have said consistently in the state of Victoria, we're the most satisfied with the education experience we've had. Yeah. And if you look at that on the national stage, we've been one or two amongst the large public universities for most of the last few years as well. So there's concrete evidence around that. But also we can talk about the evidence on the research side. Mm-hmm. We've made consistent improvements over the last 6 to 10 years in our research performance. And if you look at some of the evidence, and I take it all with a little bit of a pinch of salt because there's lies, damn lies and statistics, as is so often said, but no public university has improved its sort of academic performance research-wise faster than Deakin has over the last 5 years.
Yeah, wow.
And much as I'm loath to talk about the Times Higher rankings because it's the one I think is possibly the most problematic because of its perception, if you look at their measures of research quality, it puts us at 87th in the world, so well within the top 100. Mm-hmm. So it's not just me saying, isn't it great? There is objective evidence behind it.
Yeah,
and that's proof. What we want to keep doing, and that's my proof point. But we will consistently have conversations around the executive table and the senior leadership team around we don't want to trade one off for the other. We have to focus on making sure that improvements in one don't come at the price of reductions in the other.
Yeah. You're releasing a white paper soon on the social license challenge facing universities. I believe you want people beyond the sector to engage with the ideas and join the conversation. Can you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah. So I'll talk about why I need people outside of the sector to engage first. Mm-hmm. We can talk to ourselves, and we do it very frequently and we do it very articulately, but we are talking to ourselves.
We're very experienced.
We're very experienced at talking to ourselves. And the only way we will change and deliver what we need to do is to bring the broader Australian community with us. And I have a very strong view that until we have brought the broader Australian community with us, it will be very hard for us to say, trust us, resource us further for us to do more than we are doing at the moment. So I think that's why I want to go beyond. So the white paper is really an exploration of what social license means for Australian universities in 2025 and what we might do to start to put things right. And as I said, we've got these pillars of integrity, trust, responsibility and accountability within there. And we need to look at how we make sure within all of those pillars we get it right. but also within the context of a university. So I've talked a lot about what integrity, trust, responsibility and accountability means for education and how we make sure that we do that, what it means for research. And as well as doing the sort of the obvious thing that our research must be high quality, must be backed by a great deal of integrity, we must be accountable for what we find, this is where the flip side of this comes. We've also got to be brave enough to do things that are uncomfortable, challenge paradigms, challenge the norm, and give our academics not just the responsibility and the ability, but to make them really proud of saying, we are not simply going to accept the world as it is. We are going to look, we are going to explore and find ways of making it better or better understanding what is happening. And to do that with pride and to do that knowing you have the backing of the institution to do that. Because that inevitably, at times, pressures vested interests outside of the university. And I've got lived experience in my leadership time of people ringing the university and saying, how dare you let your academics do this? It's damaging for my X, Y, or Z or my business. And it's a very easy response, which is to say, they are an expert in that area. They have done high quality, solid work that has come to a conclusion that is different to yours. You might not like the conclusion, but I'm going to stand behind them and back them in doing that. And that's happened a number of times in my career. And I've wanted to assure our community that we will continue to do that. So that is part of the social license as well, because if a university can't do that, we're failing, because there's few other organisations in a liberal democracy that can actually do that work. In the education space, along the same way, we talk about the importance of giving our students the skills to navigate difficult conversations, challenging ideas, working in a way that enables them to leave university with an ability to work with people who they might fundamentally disagree with in some areas, but find areas where we can come together, areas where we can work, and we can play the idea and not the person in those debates. And I think that's a really important thing, because if you look at what's happening recently, too much of what's going on within and beyond the walls of universities is this inability to accept that people can hold legitimately different ideas. It doesn't make you evil. It doesn't make you somebody you cannot talk to and engage. It is legitimate. This is not a new thing. And in the white paper, I quote Clark Kerr. So it's a name that won't be familiar to many people. He was the founder and designer of the University of California system and was president in the 1960s at a time when America was going through another period of tumult. Vietnam War, black rights, many, many other things were going on. And there were some very, very difficult and robust debates on campus. And Clark has this quote, which he said, our job as a university is to make students ready for difficult ideas, not difficult ideas ready for students, or words to that effect. And I think that holds as true now as it did in the late 1960s, that we want to give our students that skill. But we need to accept the fact that that will be challenging for many of our students. We need to support them, but at the same time, we need to say that's non-negotiable. You can't just play the person and say, I don't want to listen to that because I disagree with it.
Where are universities sort of sitting today in this particular sort of climate when it comes to, you know, bigger discussions happening that people are kind of expecting universities as an institution to weigh in on one side or the other, or are expecting, you know, some sort of an alignment and getting uncomfortable if it doesn't align with where they're sitting. What traditionally has been the role of a university in a societal sense from that perspective, and what should the role be today?
This has been a live debate for much of the role of a university, certainly since World War II and probably long before that as well.
So it's not the first time.
It's not the first time, and I think it will continue to come back. For many of these difficult ideas, I will often get asked, well, what's the university's view on that? And I'm not sure in many cases you can absolutely have a university view, because the university is largely, well, it is the people that sit within it, and there will be very, very, very few points of view where there is unanimity. And I think my response to that often, and I've learnt this over the years, is not to say we have a view. It is to say our role is to have the environment where these difficult ideas where you are seeking a view is debated, where we will bring people onto campus and have those challenging and difficult debates, but not to say we go down one path or the other. I think we have probably done ourselves a disservice as a sector by too frequently coming up with that statement that our view as a university is X, Y, or Z, rather than recognising the plural views that many in our community and the wider community would hold. Now, don't get me wrong, that is not an excuse to say that you can simply say, well, you can be racially abusive, homophobic. Academic freedom, freedom of speech has boundaries. It has to have boundaries. You cannot, to misquote Karl Popper, tolerate the intolerant. You've got to have people who are prepared to be tolerant in the way they debate and negotiate these ideas. Even if their ideas are not changed at the end of it, they've got to be tolerant. And I think that's part of I can't force this on people, but I can encourage from the top that kind of debate and build that kind of environment. And I can tell you, I've had nobody in the Deakin community come up to me and said, you're wrong on this one. Most people have said, thank you for saying what you're saying, because for most of our community, that's the kind of place they want to be in.
And like, has the pressure, in your time as VC, but your time in higher education, is there more pressure on universities to come out as an institution on one side or the other on certain issues than before? Or is it sort of the same?
There is very much greater public pressure on universities, full stop, and very much greater public awareness of what goes on in the university world. I think it's difficult to comment completely going back to my time as a student, because as a student you don't really understand what's happening at the senior level. But talking to people who were working a little bit later than that in senior roles, we are now very much more publicly scrutinised than we ever have been. And that produces a very much more considerable degree of pressure. And that scrutiny comes in difficult areas from both sides.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely, you are aware of that scrutiny. I am personally very aware that everything I say or do now is available for public scrutiny. I've got no problem with that, but you live your life in the public eye as a Vice-Chancellor now. That was not the case 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's kind of a changing set of circumstances to deal with as a VC. Well, you mentioned before, and it's kind of a debate of courage. It sounds like, to be at this sort of level, to be an institution, it needs to be a safe space to be able to push back or let your curiosity lead wherever it leads and discover whatever it needs to discover. And then, it needs to be a safe space for debate, not a safe space for, one particular idea or the other. How do we help students engage with, challenging ideas without compromising their sense of belonging?
We can write as many policy documents, guidebooks as we like. Ultimately, it is the culture that happens across the university, in the classroom, from day one all the way through their journey. And that's what we've got to be able to do, is to sort of express that view that you're coming here to be challenged, to grow your worldview, to be able to deal with address those difficult ideas, those ideas where we don't have all the answers. It's a cultural thing. And again, that's why I'm pleased to be talking about it, because I can do some things in the institution, I can do some things with a lot more difficulty, but one of the things you can do from the top is actually start to say, this is the kind of culture you want to see, and propagate that. And I think that's what we've got to do. This isn't about policy. This is about the kind of institution we fundamentally are. And indeed, the kind of sector I think we should fundamentally be.
Can you reflect on a time, if you can remember any, that you felt uncomfortable and challenged with an idea that you had, and maybe it changed your perspective on something?
There are many little ones that you come through, because as you go through your education, your working life, and particularly in medicine, so much of what you are taught in one year is proved to be wrong or imprecise in later years.
Right.
So, very personal example, my surgical career, when I started my surgical career and started my surgical research career, stomach ulcers were thought simply to be due to stress and too much acid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the perception sort of still is that, right?
But in fact, the vast majority of them are caused by a bacterial infection.
Well, I mean, I got to go talk to my doctor, because
Yes.
this is breaking news for a lot of people. But interesting, though.
Yeah.
It's
So the
obviously
vast majority,
an ingrained kind of
and there's
assumption.
is a grain assumption that the majority of stomach duodenal ulcers are caused by a bacterial infection. That changed the world overnight. And the work that I was working on for my doctoral thesis, by the time I'd written it, was almost completely irrelevant. But that's challenging in one way, but it's actually really exciting in another, because you've been part of a transformation.
Totally.
And there are many, many other examples in clinical practice where that has happened. But again, it's not a new thing. On one of the stock quotes that people used to talk about when you introduce a new group of medical students to their program, that was said in the UK, certainly said amongst my US colleagues, I don't know if it was said here, is by the time you qualify, 50% of what we teach you is likely to be wrong or inaccurate. Our challenge is we don't know which 50%. Mm-hmm. And that reflected the sheer pace of change in clinical practice, and I don't think that's changed. And I think if you look at any professional area, you're going to see that same driver. We are living in a world where knowledge, understanding, technology is changing at such a pace that everybody is going to be challenged by this worldview that what I thought was the norm is no longer the norm. You've got to be comfortable with that. But also you've got to have this sense of insatiable curiosity, which is not to get concerned or worried about it, but actually to enjoy it. Because I think if you don't enjoy it, you're going to find the world a very, very difficult place.
That's an interesting one about the stomach ulcer, because it probably is a great example that reflects how long it takes for a development like that.
Yes.
That is very, scientific, and it is what it is, to be kind of to seep through and be accepted in society as instead of a presumed sort of assumption or wisdom.
Yeah. And I think this is also another point that I make, that great scientific evidence on its own doesn't change policy overnight.
That's right, yeah.
Policy, frameworks, all those other things change through a whole series of other drivers. And as an academic community, we've got to recognise that we play a role in shaping the future of our country through the application of that evidence. But it is naive to think that simply great evidence will change something tomorrow. It is one part of a difficult and complex system. Now, it is easy to throw rocks at politicians, but they have a really, really difficult task to do. And bringing together communities with very disparate views into a sort of an agreed policy position is a difficult thing to do. And they are balancing out not just what the best scientific evidence would say, how far is the community prepared to go on a journey? How far can we bring? How much can we afford? What is the trade-off between the evidence advantaging and perhaps giving good outcomes for one group against perhaps disadvantaging another group? They're trading all of those. We are but one part of that. We need to play a really strong part. And this comes back to the white paper. Another conversation I sort of try in there is the role of academic research as being the honest broker. What I mean by that is that we talk about our research in a way that gives the right level of information and confidence to those who are using that research, either for policy or change or developing new products, but doesn't overstate it and openly acknowledges where the gaps are. so that we're giving that right information, and also absolutely fundamentally recognises that there is more to changing policy and approach than simply great evidence.
You mentioned research, and you were talking about it a bit earlier as part of the sort of core, not value proposition, but mission, I guess, of why universities exist. Was this, well, firstly, research is such a big, part of this now for universities and what we hear from them. Was it kind of always the case?
So universities have been around now for a very long period. I mean, we're well over 1,000 years of universities in the development history. When universities first started, they were largely teaching organisations. And it was really the 19th century where you started to see different models of universities. And there was a model that was advocated by Cardinal Newman, Catholic cardinal, which was the university really as that sacred holder of the knowledge leading to a great education. And he talked about practical knowledge being useless. So this was this notion that we are there to think about the things that are not the everyday, but to go beyond that. And he also said, if a university's role is research, then why do we need students? But at the same time, there was a model that was developing in Germany and in the US and to some extent in the UK, where actually that fusion of research and education was becoming more and more common. And in the early 20th century, partly precipitated by World War I, there was a real explosion of the engagement of universities and research. That really reached its crescendo after World War II, when America said very much that research development associated with universities is part of the future of our country. So it has not always been thus that you've seen these two parallel strands. It's really in the last 80 to 100 years that that model has developed. But now it is there. And in a world where knowledge is changing so quickly, so rapidly, I don't believe you could have a strong tertiary education in an environment that wasn't looking to the future, that wasn't exploring, wasn't doing that research. So I think we are at a point where that is inevitable. The balance between the two is where the debate, how much effort do you put into one versus the other, which areas do you research, will be really important. The other difficult debate is what kind of research you do. There's always a lot of pressure to do research that takes ideas that we know about it already and look to find ways of generating impact from those ideas through new companies, new policies, new approaches, new patterns of care in healthcare. But those only happen because we've got a background of good, often what people outside the organisation would see as esoteric discovery research, looking to explore and push the boundaries that people have no idea about. And it is really important that as a nation, we keep that balance.
So because I was going to ask, how, what value everyday people would think that research is offering them. But you kind of talked to it there a little bit where, it's not always, it can't all be things that are immediately understandable. Some of it needs to be directed to things that we don't even, know or understand yet.
So absolutely, we need both. And I'll give you two stories. Our entire world is built around electronics these days, almost everything. But without fundamental physics, none of the developments in transistor technology that took place in the 30s, 40s and 50s could have happened. It's applied fundamental physics. You need to have that. So when the people in the late 19th, early 20th century were exploring the structure of atoms, the periodic table, all of that, what use did that have then? Probably very little. What use does it have now? It underpins almost everything we do. The other one I do, which is a little bit more sort of cheeky, is if I wrote a grant today to say, I want to develop the idea of imaginary numbers that can't possibly exist, could never exist, because I think they're mathematically interesting. You can imagine how some people would play that out in the media.
Mm-hmm.
But imaginary numbers enable us to have mathematics that enables us to do the very complex maths that enables our MRI scanners to work, to enable radar to work, to enable so many other things to work.
Yeah.
You have to have that fundamental discovery research that can then underpin the impactful research that people see beyond the boundaries of the university. The question is not, do you need both? You do. The question is, how much do we need of one and how much do we need of other, and how do we make sure that we keep the balance between the two right? And that's where we need social license to be able to have those debates and discussions, but also bring the public with us, being able to tell those stories as to why esoteric discovery research, it might not benefit the community now, but who knows?
What do you think needs to change in research to make it more accessible and impactful?
There's a couple of things. The first is we need to be really good at using clear, simple language to explain what we do, how we do it, and why we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Our academic communities, and I've been as guilty as this of others over the years, it is very easy to fall back into the grammar, the language use, the words of your particular academic tribe.
Yeah.
The problem is that's almost imperceptible at times, impenetrable, I should say, to people outside of your academic group, let alone outside of the university. We need to move away from this idea that it is important for our discipline to have its own language. No, we need to have language that can be understood easily by those outside of our discipline so that we can articulate what we're doing well and what we do. The other thing that we need to do is to be really honest about what we are doing and the likely impact of that. That's a difficult conversation because I absolutely understand if you're a junior researcher, what you are doing matters intently to you. I come from a surgical cancer background where most of my research was. I don't know how many times cancer X, Y, or Z has been cured in mice over my 30 years where I've been engaged loosely with clinical practice.
Yeah.
We've got to be honest with people around this is a step. This is one part of unraveling a really, really complicated journey and bringing the community with us. And I think it's really important we do that. I mean, I've used a medical example, but you can pull out many, many other examples in there. But we can't do that on our own. We need to do it so that the public understand why we're doing this, but we also need to bring the media with us so that when researchers are being interviewed, the right questions are being asked. And we don't always see that.
How, I mean, you know, we're running out of time here a little bit, but how do you even start to make that impact when you know that the latest slight, you know, development in cancer research is always going to be presented, you know, on a retail level, you know, in the news bulletin as a good news story or something like that.
And it will be. And I'm not sure you can easily change that, but I think it is important we recognize it because I personally believe that it actually harms us because people become immune to
the proportion of the development
the proportion gets lost. And it's sort of, I've heard it all before. And I think we need to start there. It's challenging for journalists because the journalism world has changed immensely. We see very few full-time science or knowledge-based reporters working well. And I think that part of this is actually my sense of us helping to lead by accepting this role as honest brokers. So when we as researchers go out there, we're talking about it with that balance thing. And accepting that might not mean that we get the light shone on us quite as much, but when the light does get shone, it's for genuine advances.
Talk to me about something that Deakin has researched that gives you hope for the future.
I always dislike this kind of question because the one I pull out means I get accused of being the father who favours one child over another.
Let the emails be open to all of you.
So I think let's pull out a couple of ideas. One is the work we're doing in circular economy, which is taking the mountains of waste clothing, mountains of waste product, and recycling it into usable raw materials to go there. I think this whole notion of the circular economy is really important. Just last week, we were launching part of the circular economy biofactory, taking bio-waste and using that as a source line for multiple raw materials for future. Wow. That's one that gives me real hope that we're taking fundamental discovery-based material science and turning it into something that's very practical, addressing a real problem that is out there beyond the walls of the university. The other one I pull out, which is really interesting, is the Food and Mood Centre, looking at how you can help people with complex mental illness by looking at their diet, thinking about how food interacts with your treatment, your behaviour. Difficult, challenging work, but potentially really, really impactful. There's probably 20 other examples that I could pull out really easily, and I do say two with a degree.
You can blame it on us.
Yes, I'll blame it on you.
We edited them out.
Yes,
okay? We don't only so much time.
But I think what both of those have got is they're both underpinned by a very strong fundamental understanding of the science, the basis, the discovery work, and then taking that and applying it beyond the walls of the university into the wider community.
And lots of young people are seriously questioning whether university is the right path for them. 1 in 3 Australians question whether university is worth it. Why should people study at university today?
So I'm going to turn that around and say, I want to start by saying post-18 education is really important. But that doesn't mean to say that there is an inherently greater value in going down a university path than going down a vocational path. It is about having the willingness and the ability to explore both, and the willingness to say, both from a systems point of view, I can change pathway if that's the right thing for me, and the pathways are there so people can come back in. And I do think that's an important part of what we do, because I think if we simply say that university is the most important path post-18, we're actually doing the nation a disservice. And that's part of my social license argument. We need to see both and provide good both. But coming back to university education, I believe it is still a great thing to do. Purely from a venal fiscal point of view, we know even now, economically, you do really well by getting a degree. On average, there's a very, very significant salary premium over a lifetime from having a degree level education. But I think that's sort of the hard, maybe tangible part of this. The softer intangible is, if we get this right, and I think we really try to get this right, is it gives you that skill set to both be curious, but also to challenge, and also to deal with a world that is changing really, really quickly, where there is probably more greyness and uncertainty, and to help you navigate that. It also provides you with a great opportunity to be exposed to different environments, different people, different communities. There's a lot of conversation around international education, but there's nothing better than sitting down and talking with someone from a different cultural background and saying, what's it like for you thinking about this challenge? That's really enriching. And if we do it well, we have people leaving with that insatiable curiosity to explore the world and make a positive difference beyond it. So I absolutely think it is vital. And on a personal level, there's almost nothing I do now that wasn't shaped to some extent by my time at university.
Students spend a lot of time and money on uni in Australia. It's not cheap. Look, what are you doing, and what is Deakin doing to make sure that, you know, students get the most value out of their degrees?
So it is a very significant investment and choice, and I think choosing your university pathway is one of those major life milestones alongside getting married and buying a house. I think it's of that magnitude in terms of what it means to you. We have to recognise that, and I believe we do. I think the focus on quality, the student experience, ensuring that we care deeply, that we look at ways our students are succeeding and where they're not, what can we do to change? So it is that continual evolution of change, adaptation, support for the students, but recognising that there isn't one size fits all. A lot of what you might recommend to change the university experience for an 18-year-old school leaver looks very, very different from the 30-year-old mum of two coming back to do a business qualification part-time. We have and we are thinking about ways of how do we personalise that experience at scale. And have we got it completely right yet? No. But do we have an enduring and absolute commitment to making sure that we do what we can? We do.
There's a lot of new students who'll be starting at this time of year when this podcast goes out. How did you feel when you started at uni?
Perfectly honestly, petrified and completely clueless as about what I was about to experience.
There you go, if you're feeling the same way.
Yes, and I think
None
that
other
point
than
is...
Iain Martin felt that way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our students will feel, I really don't know what's happening. I'm not sure what's going. It's daunting. It is absolutely daunting. And I think don't imagine that you're the only person feeling that. You are probably actually in the majority, but most people are too nervous to actually admit that they're feeling that because they're worried that they're the only one. You're not the only one. And the consequence from that is don't stew, don't sit in your own uncertainty, is if you don't know, ask. If you don't know, find out from people in the university what, where, why and how. Ask the questions, find out. That's the biggest advice that I can give you. You're going to feel that, oh, this is just, I don't know, I don't understand. It's not the structured system you had at school. Enjoy it, enjoy the uncertainty, but ask.
Yeah. People want to help.
Yes, and they do. And one of the things that I'm immensely proud of the Deakin community is people do want to help. They are hugely proud of their relationship with the students and hugely supportive, but they do need to be asked the question first.
What does Deakin do better now compared to, I don't know, when you went to uni or maybe when you first started in higher education?
We certainly don't post results on the notice board.
I think we should bring it back. Resilience, that's what we're teaching. Goodness.
Yeah. So I think there is a lot more support for students now. Certainly when I went through university, it was very much sink or swim. There wasn't a lot of student services. There wasn't a lot of student support.
Yeah.
We do that very well. Students with disabilities, there are pathways and support pathways there now that just simply did not exist. And just some very practical things. When I went through university in 1982, the internet was barely there. If I wanted to find some information, it was a physical trek to the library. It was going to the shelves and pulling off dusty journals, finding the right one, or more often than not, finding the one copy.
Wrong one.
The one copy you wanted was the one that was missing from the collection. And I think anyone who did research at that time will tell you the same story. So and I remember when I was doing my high degree bio research, it was just at the time that digital search was coming in for journals. And I remember sitting at home with the modem dialing up some ridiculously slow speed.
Go make a cup of coffee.
You make a cup
go
of
make
coffee.
dinner.
But,
go have a shower. Come back tomorrow.
Might have taken you 2 hours, but that was a hell of a lot better than the day and a half it would have taken you in the old system. Yeah. So I think that sense of technology enabling you to do stuff now that was either impossible or incredibly time consuming was a big change as well.
What advice would you have to students at the beginning of their university journey?
I'd say the first thing, which is if you're not sure, ask, would be my number one. The second is most of our students make the right choice and end up in a degree that they love and find themselves comfortable in it. But if you are finding that this is not what you expected, don't sit there and suffer. Don't sit there and stew. Think about, can I change my pathway? Can I look at other options? And I think that's a really important thing to say, that one of the things that we are much better now is this ability to move around. You're not making a fixed decision. So you make your choice to study at university on good but not complete information. And a minority of students will find themselves in a program that doesn't actually suit them. And again, my very strong advice would be talk to people and find out, are there options to either refine what I'm studying or look to a different pathway?
Yeah.
And the final thing I'd say is make the most of it. It might feel like a whole lot of pressure. And I know now that students are juggling jobs in the way that my cohort didn't have to do.
Yeah.
But this ability to spend a significant chunk of 3 years exploring a knowledge area that you love, it's a luxury that you won't get again anytime soon. So
Totally.
make the most of it, because you don't see it as that luxury when you're there,
No.
but it is.
Yeah.
And really enjoy that time.
It's about you
Yes.
this time.
Yes.
So even though there's pressure from, it's not about your parents, it's not about the teachers, it's about you.
Yeah. And you can shape so much of that experience. And I think that's both a challenge for people, but a real opportunity. And I think play the latter, make it an opportunity.
Yeah. Good advice. Final questions.
Yes.
Very quick fire.
Yes.
We're just looking for a word or two here. What's it like being Vice-Chancellor in one word?
Interesting.
Interesting.
With an exclamation mark at the end of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer.
Yes.
Very appropriate, I think. What's the last thing you asked AI to do? It's a bit risque, this one.
I'm going to sound like a complete nerd, but it was last night, and I've got a home computer server that I run some stuff on at home, and I just asked it, how do I write a program to do X? And it did it for me, because I'm not great at doing it. It did it for me really, really quickly and completely accurately.
Great. That's using AI to its full potential.
Yes,
How do
yes.
I write a program
Yes.
for this? Amazing. And finally, what's your favorite podcast? You don't have to say Stories of Wonder, although, would be a nice endorsement, but.
Look, there's a couple that I really enjoy, but I think my favourite is The Rest is Politics, because two great ex-UK politicians, but they've just got this wonderful banter
with
between Alistair Campbell and
Rory Stewart.
Yes.
Yep.
But really great people. And I love the conversations, but it also reminds me a lot of what I see in politicians, because I get the privilege of meeting with politicians outside of the public gaze. And you actually see in them this deep intellectual curiosity, care, the debating the ideas, not playing the person in a way that you don't see in public. And I wish more people could see that, because it would make a difference.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, great answers. And it's been nice to see a bit more of you here, Iain, and nice to chat with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.